Hello, my friend Aubrey. Are you excited to be here today?
I am. I cannot wait to share this with you guys. We got a great question about accents on the IELTS exam. And if you haven't asked yourself this before, you could find yourself rocking up to the IELTS speaking exam and suddenly getting this question and never having thought of it before. So I'm glad you're getting the answer now instead of on test day thinking about it for the first time.
We do get asked this a lot about using British English and American English on the exam, from mixing the spelling to even some grammatical differences between British and American English. And this question refers to speaking. So we're going to answer all of this, but let's get to the speaking question. Aubrey?
Yes, so this was on Spotify from Mirzaliev, and they asked, is it okay to mix accents during the IELTS speaking test from American to British and vice versa? If I say the word mobile in American, does the examiner think that I mispronounced it? Very
What
good
a great
question.
question. So great. I love it. Okay, Aubrey, what are your thoughts? Is the examiner going to care if this person mixes British and American pronunciation?
No, you are safe. You can use British or American pronunciation from New Zealand, South Africa.
Yeah.
The examiner is going to understand you. They're very familiar with the slang and the accents and the different pronunciations.
Yes.
You are good. So, this is one less thing to stress about.
Sorry, I just coughed. I'm getting over a
Bless
cold,
you.
guys. um, yeah, I mean, like, I lived abroad for most of my 20s, and there are some words that I say oddly that sound weird to other Americans just because I was around Brits and Australians for so long. We all do that. You pick up different pronunciation styles depending on where you've lived, who you talk to, what you watch, even on TV. So, from British people to Australian people to everyone in between, we all mix up everything, and that's natives. So, as students, guys, you can definitely mix and match accents. So, today we're going to go through a list of very fun words that are pronounced differently in the UK and here. And we're also going to connect them all to an IELTS topic. So, we make sure that we're still focused on the exam.
Absolutely. And we also want to make sure you guys don't miss a very recent All Ears English episode with Luke from Luke's English podcast. It was called The Subtle Differences Between American and British English with Luke's English podcast. And he shared so many great tips for understanding both pronunciations, for
Nice.
using both pronunciations. And he gave me some tips I hadn't even thought about before of sort of like specific differences in the syllable stress. And it's really fascinating. So if you missed that episode, go check it out. It was AEE All Ears English 2140. And be sure to follow All Ears English as well. There's lots of great tips and vocabulary over there that you might be missing.
Yes, and at the end of today's episode, guys, we're going to tell you our favorite tip that he shared about the syllable stress difference, which I didn't know, and I think it's
Me too.
so interesting. So stay until the end, guys, because we're going to talk about that. So let's get into this. The first word is, in the US, we say laboratory, but in the UK, and I love this, they say laboratory. And honestly, I sometimes say it that way because it sounds like an evil genius in a cartoon, like, "Ooh, come to my laboratory." Like, it's just fun to say that.
Exactly. You're going to hear that on maybe cartoons or podcasts, right? When we want to have a little bit of, have our voice sound a little bit menacing, we
Yeah,
might say it with that British accent. Step into my laboratory.
totally. But guys, again, you can say laboratory or laboratory. They're both fine. And to connect it to IELTS, science comes up all the time. It could be in reading and listening, or you could be talking about something related to science, testing, research. So that word definitely is useful. Now,
I
the
could
next
see it
word.
really being useful too if you are talking about your job to share like,
Sure.
okay, it's not as exciting as like a laboratory somewhere, and then
Right?
share where you actually do work.
Yeah, totally. At my desk at home.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So the next word, we say aluminum, but in the UK and other colonies that are connected to British English, that were colonies, they say aluminium, which is also very fun.
Yes, I wonder sometimes because they spell it the same as us. So I wonder if sometimes they spell it incorrectly because of how they pronounce it, or do they spell it
I know.
differently? Do you know?
I
I need
I
to
am
look
not
into that
sure if they spell it differently because we
because it
spell it
sounds
just
like it's spelled
aluminum.
very differently, right?
Yeah, that might be one of the spelling differences as well. Now,
Interesting.
do you think there's anywhere on the exam where students have to talk about this specific type of metal, aluminum?
That's a good question, right? I could see it coming up if I'm talking about cooking and I share because I use aluminum foil a
Yeah,
lot. It's that silvery colored foil to cover something. Like, if I'm sharing my favorite easy dish, I say, and then I cover it in aluminum foil,
yeah.
or I could definitely say in aluminium foil. The examiner would know what I'm talking about either way.
Yeah, or on a academic task 1 process, right? If aluminum
Yes.
is involved in that process, now you will know what that word means. The next word, Aubrey, what's that?
So in the US, we say herb with a silent H, rosemary, thyme, all of these different herbs. But in the UK, they pronounce that H and they say
Yeah.
herbs.
Which sounds so funny to me.
It's really cute.
But again, you could say herb or herb. They're both fine. To me, herb is like a man's name. That's how it sounds
Yes,
to me.
Herbie. Herbie the love bug, right?
Herbie Hancock, there's
Yes.
lots of herbs and Herbies. So anyways, guys, again, if you're talking about cooking, right? You put different herbs in your dishes, now I can't think of
You
any.
can't think of any. I said rosemary and thyme. What else can
There
I
we
think of?
go.
Marjoram, garam masala, because
Oh,
I've
wow.
been making some Indian food lately, so I'm using these
Nice.
Indian herbs that
Oh, I
smell
love it.
so aromatic and delicious. I love it.
On that note, guys, definitely research the recipe for your favorite dish to cook in English so you can know all of those ingredient and herb
Yes.
names. Um, Now, the next one, we have the hard ah, right, in dance, but I love the British accent where it's like, oh, it's the open dance, or we say bath and they say bath. It sounds very different.
It does sound different, and at least as, someone from the US, I think we have a tendency to sort of put UK English, British English on a pedestal,
Yeah.
and it sounds so much more posh and maybe educated, right? To say
Yeah,
dance and bath, it
it does.
sounds, yeah, it's more beautiful in some ways instead of that hard A.
It is fun. So, my son's dad is from South Africa, and so he speaks with British English, right? And so he says like bath and stuff like that. And my son will sometimes pronounce words like his dad, and it's always so cute to me because he's this little American boy being like, "Oh, there's a dance on Friday" or
So
something.
cute. He's the perfect example. If he were to take IELTS, he would be using some
Right?
British pronunciation, some English, some American English pronunciation. The examiner
Exactly.
would not bat an eye. Like,
He
either
would
way,
get
we're
a
good.
9. He did
Yeah.
score in the 99th percentile for, reading and math, so
Nice.
I have to brag,
Gotta
he'd get a
brag
9 on IELTS
for sure.
for sure.
I
All
love it.
right. All right, Aubrey, what's the next word?
Yeah, so this one is we say advertisement in the US, most of us anyway, and in England, you would likely hear advertisement.
It's just so
Advertisement.
fun, yeah. So, US advertisement, right, for syllable stress, but, to advertisement, the stress on the second syllable, again, it sounds educated, it sounds fancy, but it's the same thing. Now, this word is extremely useful because, like in part 2, you might have to describe, an advertisement that made you buy something, right? In part 3, you might get asked about, advertising in your country. So, this is a totally common IELTS topic.
Absolutely. All right, the next one is schedule in the US with that hard k, but in British English, maybe you guys are aware, they say schedule.
So fancy. Um, can you put me on your schedule for next Monday? So again, both are fine on IELTS, guys. And speaking part 1, you often have to talk about routines, right? Weekly or daily routines. So that is obviously a useful word. The next word, we say privacy, but in the UK, you would hear privacy. Um, where would that come up on IELTS?
Yeah, maybe if you were talking about your home or your bedroom where you grew up, this
Sure.
would be interesting to talk about if you had to share a room, either with a sibling or with a roommate currently, and say, the biggest problem is there's not a ton of privacy or privacy,
Yeah,
both perfectly fine.
totally. And then the word that the student asked about, I would say mobile phone, but actually, usually Americans say cell phone instead of mobile phone, but both are used. Whereas in the UK, right, they would say mobile, which we say it that way if it's an adjective, but not as a
Right.
noun.
Yeah, so interesting. I think it's most helpful just to recognize, even if you're going back and forth, if you use sort of British English pronunciation for a while and then slip into American English, totally acceptable. We're recognizing you're hearing both all over the place. Don't feel like, oh, I started with American pronunciation. I have to stick with it or it's going to affect my score. No, it's no problem to use both.
All right, let's get to today's finale, Aubrey. Coming from that All Ears English episode with Luke, episode. What number is it?
It
I
was
just lost it.
2140.
2140.
Yes, episode 2140 of All Ears English. Okay, here, this was new to both Jessica and I. We had
Yeah.
not thought about this. It was fascinating to hear Luke explain it, and it makes perfect sense that words that have been adopted into English from French, French loan words, he was calling them. It's really interesting to think about. They follow a pattern, how they're pronounced differently in the US or in England.
Mhm,
In the US, we emphasize the second syllable. So,
mhm,
for example, ballet
mhm.
and bidet. But in British English, they emphasize the first syllable. So they say ballet and bidet. Interesting. And he had a whole
B-Day?
list. There were like 30 words that he
So
read them
many
all. I'm like,
words.
oh, they all follow that pattern.
That's crazy. I
Yeah.
never recognized that pattern before. That's so
Me
cool.
neither. And I speak French. I just like never thought about it. I never noticed the pattern. Thank you, Luke.
So ultimately, guys, this stuff is just fun to think about, and you can pronounce any of these words either way as long as what you are saying or writing is correct in either American or British English. You are fine. You could mix and match what is correct, actually, as long as it's correct somewhere. You're fine, guys. So that's one less thing to worry about for test day. That's it for us this week, but we'll be back again next week with 2 fresh episodes.
Awesome. See you next week, Jess. Bye, guys.
Bye.